Well, wouldn't you know it? President Zelensky of Ukraine is demanding more money and more weapons in a war he says he wants to end. I'll tell you what President Trump had to say. To help me go through this and some of the other news stories, I have retired Colonel Daniel Davis. Colonel Davis, thank you for joining me again.
Absolute pleasure to be here, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yeah. So Colonel Davis hosts the Deep Dive here on YouTube, as well as Rumble and other places you can get a podcast. Colonel Davis, I think President Trump is running out of patience with Zelensky. Zelensky has demanded 20 more Patriot missile systems, to which President Trump said, President Trump responded, "You don't start a war against someone 20 times your size and then hope people will give you missiles." What are your thoughts on him demanding more Patriot systems and President Trump's reaction? Why'd you even do this?
You know, that's ironic because just before the meeting in Ramstein last week, where all the European nations were getting together, even the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth showed up via VTC, which some were saying, why was he not there in person? That should send a signal, etc. But heading into that meeting, Zelensky was saying he wanted 10 new Patriot systems. He got none, as opposed to all of that. And he was really laying it on heavy and thick on the days heading into it to European partners, saying, you know, look, these things exist here. They're all over the place. Many of them are in storage. We just have to have the political will to get them. No one had any political will to give it to him. Now he wants to come out and double the number that he says he's looking for. I mean, that's just, there's something, I mean, I got to say it. I'm not trying to be rude or anything to anybody, but there's something wrong with the guy, that he thinks he's going to get 10, 20 when he didn't get 10 before, when he got none in the previous election. And then with Trump already talking about how this war is going to be over, he just wants to get it finished. On 60 Minutes last night, you had Zelensky going on there and basically accusing both the president and the vice president of being duped by the Russians and giving their talking points, etc. Then he wants to come out and try to demand 20 more Patriot systems. Look, I think if anything, you can say President Trump is showing restraint in how he's responded so far, because I can assure you, if it was me in that seat, I would have given an ultimatum to Zelensky before that. I'll just be frank with you, because in my view, Zelensky is no longer a rational partner that we can have a negotiation with. I'm talking the United States, because he can't accede to even the most basic of a reading of the reality on the ground. And when you see President Trump going unequivocally in one direction and you're trying to go in another, I just don't understand. And you're insulting him along the way. I just don't understand what's in the guy's mind. But I think that President Trump needs to say, hey, it's time to cut bait. This is not going to work out for us, for you, or the people of Ukraine. If you want to keep going with these delusions, you can run it however you see fit. You're a sovereign nation. You can do what you want. We are not going to underwrite more failure like the previous administration did. That's what I think that President Trump should do.
Yeah, part of me wonders, did Zelensky read Trump's book, Art of the Deal? And he's like, well, maybe to get 10, I demand 20, and then we'll come back and settle at that lower number. I don't know. The whole thing, I agree with you. It's like, is it time to cut bait and just move on, especially if you're not willing to work with somebody? Let me ask you this. Does this war come to an end if American weapons and money dry up? Because I don't see Europe putting up the money and the weapons like America has.
Yeah, you just see that. So you had the Ramstein meeting, and then I think the day after that, you had this meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, where all these, I think it was 30 some odd nations got together along with Ukraine, and they talked about all these things they want. And they came out saying, we're going to give another 21 billion euros of support. Now, it's important to understand that number. It was not 21 billion new euros that they're offering. It was actually a small number of new things. A lot of it was weapons and ammunition money that had been allocated before, and they just bundled it up to make it sound good. Even if it was all new weapons or funding, that's 21 billion. You remember last May, the United States gave 61 billion by itself, and that didn't even slow down the loss of the Ukraine through the rest of 2024. And so by what logic and rationale can anyone in the Western European countries or any of the European countries suggest that a third of that amount after all of the additional losses of the Ukraine side, and we're talking everywhere from Kursk into the Kharkiv area, even in some recently, Belgorod, of course, another abortive offensive operation that should never have been done. And then all along the Eastern Front, you compound all that together with 1/3 of the support before, and you think that something is going to change, something's going to be different. I just, for the life of me, cannot understand what these otherwise intelligent senior European leaders are thinking that leads them down to a path like this, on top of, when I say again, the president of the United States has said we're trying to get this over with quickly, and we're not going to provide any new funding. So it is an irrational position, and it's one that's only going to doom more Ukrainian people to die to achieve the same outcome, which is that the Russians have won.
Yeah. It would be interesting to take a poll of the European people, the European taxpayers, and say, do you want to continue to support Ukraine? Do you want to continue to support this war? And then compare that to the globalist leaders in Brussels that are pulling the strings. I'll bet you would see a very a large difference in opinion. Help me and my audience understand, where are we at with the ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia? Because the United States felt it was happening. Then the next day I read Ukraine is firing missiles deeper into Russia than they've ever fired before. Then the United States says, okay, we're back on track. And then on Palm Sunday, Russia attacks a Ukrainian city, killing many civilians. Where are we at in your mind?
Yeah, there is no ceasefire. I've been saying from the beginning, there's not going to be a ceasefire, no matter what anybody wants. I think that it was worth it for the Trump administration to try to get it. I applauded it. Anything that can stop the killing for any amount of time is something we should do. If that opens up any window of possibility for diplomacy while no one's being killed, that's a great deal. But unfortunately, the battlefield realities made that almost certainly not going to succeed, because the only party would have benefited would have been the Ukraine side, because they're in the comparative disadvantage in power in every category that matters. So the Russian side has, and they were very plain, said, well, we'll contemplate a ceasefire. We'll even do one in these limited areas here, so long as all the details are agreed to. The details were never agreed to. And by the way, this issue here in the not Kirovi Rig, this one's in Sumy, where all those kids were killed and all the civilians and stuff. There is evidence from the Ukraine side. One of the mayors of one of the cities in the area, as well as one of their parliament members in the Verkhovna Rada, which said there was intelligence before that event happened that it was going to be targeted by Russians. There was a military parade of sorts, or an award ceremony for the 117th Brigade, which took part in the Kursk offensive, and they were going to give them some awards. Well, if anybody has been paying attention to what the Russian side has been saying for more than a month now, and unfortunately not many in the West are, but if they had, they would have known that the Russians, as the Ukraine side has been forced out, they have been covered all kinds of atrocities against their civilian population, which just angered the Russians as much as Bucha is alleged to have angered the Ukrainian side. And so when they found out that that one of those brigades that they had driven out was going to be awarded in Sumy, which is, within artillery range of the border, Russia apparently chose that they were going to attack that formation, which they did. And the Verkhovna Rada member said that she was upset about that because the general in charge of it was told about it, that it was a risk, and yet he went forward with it anyway. Now, the way it's been projected in the Western media, there's been, that I've seen, no mention of the fact that there was a intelligence that said an attack was coming. No evidence that no one said anything about the fact that there were 117th Brigade was there. It's only in some of the Ukrainian media. But the impression being that Russia's just this evil character that just, I'm going to kill a bunch of civilians, fire a couple of missiles at them. That's the way it's being projected. But the evidence is more complicated than that. Now, I can't personally validate for sure what this Verkhovna Rada person said, but this is not coming from the Kremlin. This is coming from a member of the two officials in Kiev, or one in Kiev and one in the area in Sumy province. So it definitely deserves to be looked at, but that needs to be included when people are talking about this, because Russia continues to say, we're not going to stop fighting until we get our core issues addressed. That's something that Lavrov said over the weekend. We're not just going to stop fighting unless we know we're going somewhere. And until we know that, we're not going to stop fighting. They're open about that, and they're doing exactly what they said.
Does Zelensky really want this war to end? Because up until Trump stopped the flow of weapons several weeks ago, Europe was holding meetings with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. They were ready to go forward. Trump stops the money and the weapons, and everybody panics, says, "Yeah, we want peace talks." Then he turns it back on and they start attacking Russia again. I just don't see that Zelensky really wants this to end. I don't know that Putin really wants it to end, but if I had to guess, I would say Russia wants it to end because they're on the winning side, and Zelensky and Ukraine don't want it to end because they're on the losing side. Your thoughts?
Yeah, but the two parts of that question. Let's look at the Ukraine side first. So over the weekend, you had Zelensky in that meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. He made a recorded speech and addressed them via teleconference where he said it is time to end this via negotiation. So he used those words right up front, but then he lays out all these conditions as though he were the boss, as though he was on the upside, giving and demanding things of the Russian side. Meanwhile, you have the Russian side is saying, listen, until you meet these requirements, and that means denazification, demilitarization, and the surrender of these territories, we're simply going to keep fighting. Russia, in my view, has shown consistently from 2015 to 2021, all throughout this war, and again right now, they want a negotiated settlement. But every time we don't take the negotiated settlement they offer, we end up getting a worse situation for the Ukraine side. The deal gets worse and worse and worse. And now then we're faced with a situation to where we can either get an ugly deal for Ukraine right now, or Russia is going to say, we'll simply solve this on the battlefield. I think that this may be the last chance we get, because I think that, to your point at the top of this show, I think Trump's patience is wearing thin. And either he's going to say, you accept the deal that I can work out with Putin to end this via negotiations, or you're on your own and you can figure it out, in which case then Russia will just take the gloves off. And I think that they'll just seize by force of arms everything that they want. And I promise you, it will be much worse than the ugly deal that's on the negotiating table today.
Okay. Just to bring it back home to kind of help myself and my audience make sense of it, that this in negotiations, this is something Congress does. They insert these what they call poison pills, where they'll put together a great bill, but then they'll slip something in that they know will either kill it or they'll get it right. So, for example, the border bill that they wanted, they said, "Oh, Donald Trump, he's against protecting Americans. He's against protecting women and children. He wants to keep an open border," but their border bill allowed for 4,000 illegals to come in the country every single day. And then when he gets in, boom, it's like almost zero. And what does he say at the State of the Union? I guess we didn't need a different bill. We just needed a different president, right? So Putin has said several times, this war will not come to an end until there's a new president in Ukraine. Do you see the European Union keeping Zelensky in, or at some point is a new president brought in and Zelensky removed?
I'll tell you, as long as the European Union, the leaders in a couple of key places, obviously the UK, France, and Germany probably, as a minimum, as long as they can derive what they perceive to be benefit to have Zelensky there, Zelensky will remain in power. But the minute that calculation changes, they'll abandon him in a heartbeat. He thinks that they're friends or whatever. There are no friends involved here. As long as they can extract some benefit, they'll go with it. And of course, they have been talking about that the benefit they want is to harm Russia. But if they calculate, especially if Trump gives an ultimatum like I suggested and says, you either do this or you're on your own, then the Europeans are going to go, yeah, well, we can't do it on our own. So, how about we get a new president? I think that there's a guy in the Verkhovna Rada that is by the Constitution can authorize and make a deal with this, because I don't think that Zelensky can. I think that he has emotionally, psychologically gotten himself to a position where he cannot sign on the dotted line to do what Trump is going to probably ask him to do. And then therefore, what else is going to be left but for Europe to finally say, all right, the ship is sinking. We're not going to go all the way down. We're getting on the life raft. You're on your own, Captain Zelensky, going down with the ship. So I think that's the more likely outcome.
Okay. I have to imagine that there is a lot of ego involved on the Zelensky side, where he doesn't want his name to go down in history as the guy that, destroyed Ukraine. 10 million people fled Ukraine. 1 million people have been injured or killed in Ukraine. I think he is looking for that like magical, happy ending, but I don't think he's going to get it. And so I think his ego's maybe in the way. He needs to do what's best for the country, not what's best for his own part in future history books.
Well, Stephen, I'll tell you that he lost that chance in 2022. He had the chance to do that. Just make the logical, rational calculation, which could have saved the vast majority of his country and prevented the deaths of hundreds of thousands of his men. He lost that chance. But we saw on 60 Minutes last night, he still goes on and tries to give this narrative that we didn't do nothing. We're just sitting there. All of a sudden, one day, here comes all these Russians, and they're they started this. It was their unprovoked war and all this kind of stuff, ignoring whole categories of things that the Ukraine side had done. Maybe more on that later. But in his mind, he's nothing but, he said it outright, verbatim: we're the victim. Russia's the aggressor. We're the victim. What's the problem? Why don't we get everything that we're asking for? So I don't think, and I mean this seriously, legitimately, he is not capable of doing what you just suggested there. So I think it's either going to have to be another leader, or the U.S. is just going to say, good luck going down with your ship. I regret your decision, but I'm not going to underwrite more death.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Do you think that there are people within the United States military industrial complex that also don't want this war to end because it's very, very profitable?
I mean, I don't have any personal knowledge. It just sure seems like it, because and whether I feel it or know it or anything else, they do benefit from it. They do profit from it. But, I mean, like I think you said at the minute, there's a new president in town, and he doesn't seem to be wanting to underwrite any more of this. So there's no more new deals been even signed. And by the way, part of the Department of Defense's reorganization, you had Secretary of Defense Hegseth a week or so ago announced that there'd been billions of dollars of cutting of some of these contracts that were already in existence. So things are going in the wrong direction there. And if anybody's hoping he's going to change directions, I think they're going to be waiting a long time, because I doubt very seriously, at least in this war, that he's going to do that.
Okay. Speaking of changing directions, President Trump has ordered the U.S. military to take over a large portion of the entire southern border. Colonel Douglas McGregor pointed out today, every major general involved in World War II spent time at the southern border defending our nation. Is this the right move to protect our country, or should Trump be doing even more at home with the U.S. military?
Yeah, I think George Patton was one of those, if I'm not mistaken. So that certainly was the case on our southern border before. And listen, I'm on record of saying this every time. We need to have our borders secured. It's as simple as that. You can have all kinds of political differences you want on what the laws ought to be. If you want to change them, do that through the legislative process. But whatever is the law has to be enforced at the border. It is beyond question and should be clear to anyone that if you don't have a firm, authoritative control of who does and doesn't come across your border, then that means that people that you don't know about or don't want have the potential to come in that could be doing harm to your country. And I just can't understand how anybody has a problem with that. But I guess some do. But the bottom line is, whatever it takes within the constraints of our country, within our laws, within the Constitution, and there are obviously, as you just pointed out there, as Doug pointed out, there has been a lot of precedent of having the military protect the border, so it's definitely doable, perfectly legally. I don't want to advocate anything of violating any laws of the Constitution, but I'm absolutely for applying the laws in the Constitution to keep us safe. And if that's military on the southern border, I'm for it.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me how Biden regularly said, as president, I don't have authority. If the Republicans in Congress would just give me that power, 10 to 15,000 people a day flooding into the country to get on our welfare programs, our Social Security, our safety net programs. And then Trump comes in, boom, now they're getting less than 100 a day at the border. It's just, it's crazy. I think the military presence on the border is definitely having a major positive impact. Colonel Davis, I know you're very busy. You got your own show. If people want to follow you on YouTube, where can I point them towards?
Yeah, go to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. We're also in where you can get most of your podcasts. I know a lot of people like to listen these days, and we're in both of those places, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive on whatever your favorite platform is, and you'll find us waiting there for you.
Okay, great. I'm going to put a direct link. Thank you so much for keeping my audience in the loop on what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine war, the border, President Trump, the military stuff. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Always my pleasure. Thanks, Stephen.